Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the next knowledge sharing session of Hack AI 2021-2022. Hack AI 2021-2022 is an inter-school and university hackathon. Strumng Educational Foundation, collaboration with SLASSCOM and UNDP organizing to encourage young innovators across the country to build AI-powered solutions using data science, cognitive computing, machine learning, and deep learning technologies to solve some of the most challenging issues in the country. Today, we have two special guests joining with us, Mr. Sanjeev and Mr. Yasith. So let me quickly introduce them. Mr. Sanjeev Jha is the founder and principal of Strumng, a niche consultancy services focused in developing competencies of insurance agents and emerging distributors, service providers, and insurtech entities. He's currently consultant for Fairfax and is actively involved in the operations across multiple high-growth Asian markets like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India. Mr. Yasith Fernando has years of senior management experience with a strong background in data analytics, strategy, transformation, and digital enablement. He has carried out projects in multiple industries, both from the private and public sector. He has also worked with development agencies such as ADB and World Bank, assisting them to make positive interventions to drive the economy of Sri Lanka. He is a certified analytics professional and obtained his master's degree from IE Business School in Madrid. Mr. Sanjeev and Mr. Yasith, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to join this knowledge sharing session. I will hand this session over to you to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhat. Thanks a lot for putting the entire program together. I think it's a great initiative for the country. It's very timely and happy to be part of it. And I think happy to add something important to aspiring AI professionals. I think I'm sure we've covered a lot of interesting sessions on some of the tech stuff. I think we need to combine that with also good business acumen, and hopefully myself and Sanjeev will be able to drive a good dialogue and share some of our insights with the students. So welcome to you as well, Sanjeev. Good to do another webinar with you. I think last time you and I spoke, it was a session on AI, and it's appropriate that we are still talking to AI enthusiasts, but on a more business-related topic.
Thank you, and love to you. Thank you, Yasith, and thank you, Prabhat, and lovely to be here, and always a pleasure to be in company of young and bright minds, and hopefully you can add value to them with some of the experiences that I have. So look forward to the session.
Brilliant. So Sanjeev, I thought I'll set some context and start the dialogue with you. Just before the session, I was looking at some of the top reasons why startups fail. I mean, we've seen different numbers. I mean, some people say 90% of startups fail, or maybe some of the numbers can vary from region to region, but there's definitely a good percentage of startups that unfortunately fail. And this is based on one study that's been done. And some of the bigger reasons are actually business reasons. Okay, if you leave aside the first one, running out of capital, cash, or fail to raise funds, those are also, eventually interlinked to your ability to really pitch the product and generate right revenues. But if you look at in all the other reasons, no market need, got out-competed, flawed business model, pricing and cost issues, product being mistimed, poor product. All of these are down to eventually not really understanding, I think, what's the business problem we are trying to solve, whether there's a market for that, and if there is a market, whether we are really going to the market in the best possible way. So, I think one of the interesting cases I personally come across is actually the entrance of certain fast food chains to Vietnam. If you take Starbucks, for example, I think it's, in a way, it's no-brainer for a coffee chain to enter Vietnam, because when you look at Vietnam, it's a heavy coffee drinking country. And I think even in terms of a number, if you quantify it, I think there's about $1 billion market for specialty coffee in the country. However, Starbucks has found it really challenging to grow in the country. And at the end of the day, when you really look at some of the reasons, when you look back on their entrance to Vietnam and why they have not really succeeded the way you would typically expect, because it's a big coffee drinking country, comes down to those reasons come down to not really understand the consumer. Yes, Vietnam consumers drink a lot of coffee, but what type of coffee are they into? Starbucks typically say their coffee is brewed with Arabica, but in Vietnam, the flavor they prefer is Robusta, which has a different tone attached to that. If you look at why people drink coffee, I mean, coffee is a regular drink over there, and people prefer convenience and price. And when you look at convenience and price, generally in Vietnam, you have lots of street side shops, which you can easily enter and grab your coffee. And also, not just that, some of those small stalls have really understood the needs of the consumer. See, at the end of the day, again, I mean, if you look at the Vietnamese consumers, they are not really, most of them are not your typical, let's say, the latte and the mocha consumers, what Starbucks would sell. They have their own way of drinking their coffee in some instances, let's say with condensed milk. So the shops have really understood the need, whereas maybe a fast food chain like Starbucks has not. And of course, they're evolving. But some of these reasons have really contributed to the likes of Starbucks or Gloria Jeans to not really succeed the way you would expect them to succeed in this country. And the same has been there. I mean, same issue has been there for some of the other fast food chains as well. If you take some of the burger joints like McDonald's or Burger King, I mean, they haven't done really well either. Although given that Vietnam has a large population and I think the economy is booming, the consumers are going from low income level to low middle. Still, the demand for some of these fast food chains has not been great. Why? Let's say even if you take a product like a burger, Vietnam has their own version of sandwiches which they can easily grab on the go. So they have their own fast food, and in a way that's really catering for their palate. So some of these reasons have not contributed for an obvious success story to take off in Vietnam. And I think that's where we take things for granted. I mean, we sometimes think we have a product which has worked really well in other markets, and we sometimes think, okay, it'll work elsewhere too, because we are far superior. The product is great, our operation is great. I mean, if you take McDonald's or Starbucks, not just the product, but the backend operation to source, produce, and supply, that's great. But how well do we know the consumer? Now, if you really now move from a traditional business to a tech business, some of the success stories that we hear today are coming from companies which have really evolved. If you take Netflix, for example, I'm sure most of us use Netflix. At some point, we've either owned an account or used someone else's account at least. And we are heavy users of that. But Netflix didn't start as a content sharing website. Netflix started as a DVD sharing, or what they would do is they would send the DVD to your home and collect it back. So it is a complete non-digital operation that they ran, but they figured out that wouldn't last for too long, and they quickly turned their business model around to suit the digital world. And then all the analytics and everything really came in handy for them to take off from that point. So I think there's definitely a need to get out of our comfort zone and go out and get to know the customer, get to know the market trends if you really want to succeed as a business. And I think that's where we need a clear go-to-market strategy. That's a place that will really get us to take a moment, look back, analyze the market, and make a plan to go ahead. So if you take the Gartner definition of go-to-market strategy, it covers certain elements like what is the customer looking for, and how do we really take a product to gain a competitive advantage in a particular market. What pricing strategies should we take? What sales and other channels should we use? And how do we really look at the buying journey of a consumer? And how do we understand that such that we mesh their buying journey and not really our selling journey? Because our selling journey should be aligned with their buying journey. So I think with all this in mind, I think we know that a go-to-market strategy is important, but how do we really get started? Because, like I said, I covered multiple elements, like understand the consumer, pricing, distribution channels, and that's a lot of jargon for maybe some of you when you develop your own startup, because the tech is going to be what keeps you up at night. But how do we then focus on some of these elements and really make a good go-to-market strategy? Then you are not going to be part of the 90% if you're a startup that's going to fail. So Sanjeev, that's where I want to get started with you. I'm sure you've been part of many business planning discussions with many product launches, rebranding sessions of some of the other companies that you worked for. And I think in your current role, Sanjeev, with some of the startups that you work with, you've been part of all these discussions. How do you really get things started?
With the fingers crossed, Yasith. So you start off with a prayer on your lip and fingers crossed. I think the challenge, Yasith, for us is that we're all trying to pursue greatness, and I think greatness by definition is a very filtered process, and only few really achieve that amazing success. Most of us are at a level where we achieve some success and we are reasonably happy with that. So we'll talk about this, and it's a fascinating thing. But like I think back 3-4 months back about the song Mage, Manike Mage Hite. Why did it become such a super hit song? Like, Sri Lanka has had great musicians for many years, but this song has suddenly broken all records. What is that? What is that formula that it wasn't even an original song? It was a song that was done some time back. So what was it this about this version that made it so popular with the audiences world over? And I think that's the importance of trying to understand what does the customer think, because the point you mentioned is that the second biggest reason why companies fail is that there's really no market. So many of us as CEOs or as managers or even as promoters of companies or even as bright young tech kids, we get so proud of our own idea that we get trapped in that ego of our own brilliance, and we forget that the customer has her own viewpoint about all this. And what I found, and maybe we can talk a bit more in detail, is the basic elements of design thinking. So design thinking is not a new concept. It's been there for many years now, and many companies have used it. Most of the companies in Silicon Valley use it. And what it does beautifully, Yasith, and you are aware that you're aware of yourself that what it does, the design thinking as a process, it puts the customer in front, and it starts off with the entire empathy process. So we can talk about that. So maybe we'll talk about the design thinking and the 5 core elements of design thinking, which could be useful for our young audience here, and in how they go to market. Because if you adopt a design thinking process, you may still not get the right answer, but at least it'll give you some process by which you can tick off those questions that are important. We can also talk about two tools I would like to share with the audience here. One is the Lean Canvas tool, and they can Google it, and you can find it online. It's again no rocket science. You can just Google Lean Canvas, and again we'll talk about that in the context of design thinking. And I also like to maybe I'll encourage the audience to Google something called the Empathy Map Canvas. Again, that's a very simple tool by which you can tick off your entire thing, that have you got the customer's inputs on the idea that you want to go to market with. So these are two techniques that we can leave. In the third area, maybe I'll leave it with the audience, is a small technique that I like doing myself. It's a technique that many of you would be aware of. It's called the WOOP technique, WOOP. So that's a simple technique of how do you create a plan for achieving a certain wish that you have. So if that's okay, these 3 areas we can talk, and we can start with your point on design thinking, or sorry, your point on the customer insights. Is that okay, Yasith?
Sounds perfect, Sanjeev. I think definitely, I think taking a design thinking approach to this is the best way to go, because we are then really thinking with the customer's hat on, and like what you said, I think it's easy to get carried away with the novelty of our technologies, and to have ego cloud our judgment. But how do we really get started, Sanjeev, with design thinking techniques that you mentioned that I think you'd look at the typical 5 steps of that? Definitely keen to hear that, Sanjeev, and how,
So
if
yeah. So
you
just before we
were
start,
running a
Yasith,
business, how would you?
yeah. So just give you an example that happened with us when we were in Fairfirst, when I was in Fairfirst, and is that so data analytics is a big thing. Like we know that the ability of analyzing data, the ability that we have today of analyzing data is immensely more than what we had 5 years back. And that is a very powerful tool that we have in our hand. But the question, Yasith, is that what do I do with that analysis? You know, I'm still a manager who's used to a certain way of managing things. So while the data analytics team says that I can give you all this analysis, and I have to keep asking them, okay, great, now I have this. Now what do I do? Or, because I haven't learned that, and that is, I think, that is where the challenge happens. And even if I do, even if I know, for example, if I take the simple example of, say, motor insurance, using data analysis, I can make out, okay, Yasith is a better driver than, say, Prabhat is. So maybe I should give Yasith a lower rate than I can give Prabhat. But is that, can I really go to market with that? Can I tell someone that you are a bad risk compared to so and so? So I think these become a challenging stuff in terms of go to market. So I think that's what the people who are trying to innovate, I think, have to be a bit careful about that. So you may have the power of doing something. The technology gives us the power, but is it really going to make sense to the customer, or will it alienate? So I think that's where I think design thinking really kicks in. And the first step of design thinking, which I would like to talk about, is empathy. So now empathy is a term that I think basically means that can I understand what the other person is going through? Can I really feel what the other person is going through? So that's what design thinking says, that can you really put yourself in the shoes of the customer, or in the shoes of the person that you're trying to solve a problem with? If you can't, then you are creating a solution in your own mind, and you may not be correct. Now empathy is a very powerful thing, and sometimes, again, as people with experience, or with brilliance, we end up making the foolish mistake that we know best what our customer wants, and we end up making many silly errors and mistakes. So I I don't know whether you've seen that, Yasith, in your experiences.
Quite a few times, Sanjeev, and I definitely, I think, heard of multiple cases as well. Even the coffee example I brought up.
Yeah.
Starbucks at that point, they thought it'll take off, but they even, I mean, you, sometimes you got to really think of even about the bean that you use, because what you're used to selling in another country is actually very different from the bean that's actually popular in that particular country. So
Yeah.
definitely, we've seen quite a few examples, Sanjeev, and I think coming from the tech world as well, we've seen certain examples. Have you seen anything which is actually relevant, which you've seen in your experiences working in Sri Lanka or the closer region, where you thought something would work? Either it was developed for the region, or maybe you thought something, I mean, that was working for your larger regional or global market, and you brought something down, but didn't really kick off. If you're in a position to share, even if none of that is confidential, would love to hear some of that.
Yeah, I think many things, and it doesn't have to be big.
Best lessons come from our mistakes.
Yeah, it's many things, yes, and it doesn't have to be on product, or it can also be some of the internal HR practices, for example, that multinationals bring to a country, don't work. They don't work, because the country is there's a unique history, there's a unique culture, which people have to accept and understand. And sometimes sitting in London or sitting in New York, you end up making decisions or choices which does not resonate well. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why most of the mergers and acquisitions fail, because they forget the ground realities. And many of the so there are some analysts sitting somewhere else, far away in a different market, trying to do it, and they do a great job intellectually, but they miss that reality that is there. And the same, going back to your example on Starbucks, I think if Starbucks had the power to do enough of customer insights before they launched that product, right? They could have done that. but I think it was just the hubris by which allowed them to say, no, we'll just push it through, and that would have been quite a costly mistake. So I think
And Sanjeev, what you correctly pointed out, I mean, it doesn't have to always be about a product. I personally also come across multiple instances where we've not really understood the employees when we go to a new market. I think unfortunately, I think it actually comes also from the region. I've seen multiple instances where even let's say Sri Lanka is managed by even an Indian operation. Sometimes, okay, we tend to think in India and Sri Lanka are quite different, quite similar in nature, sort of similar
no,
cultures. We'll sometimes look the same, but very different. I used to
yeah,
work in consulting, and then I used to have a lot of Indian colleagues who would come down for the first time. So some of them may have come here, let's say, on holiday. But when I started working with them, some of their first business visits would be for the first time here, although they had done great in India. And I would always tell them right up front, we may look different, but people are different. And sometimes I'll then initially take them, let's say, to meet a few clients, or let's say we'll spend about a day or two getting a project started. And then when I catch up with them, they're like, you were right. Because the
yeah,
way, we have what we call the island mentality.
yeah,
um, uh, we don't, I think the way I'll say it, maybe we don't work that hard. We work smart, but I don't think I don't think Sri
yeah,
Lankans work as hard as our fellow friends in India.
yeah,
And sometimes work cultures are quite different. The intensity is quite different.
yes,
Competition here is relatively low as compared to what's in India. So competition really drives how employees behave, or how an
agreed.
employer could treat an employee. And I think given that how businesses operate quite differently in India and Sri Lanka, and how the supply and the demand factors are different for employees, the cultures are very different. And my colleagues have really realized, my Indian colleagues, my friends have realized after a while, and we've always met up for a drink and then had a good laugh about it. And
Yes, yes. Yes, no, I absolutely agree, Yasith, with you, and I give counsel to any Indian who's coming there for the first time in Sri Lanka, going there for the first time. I said, I give them the same counsel. I said, that we are all human beings, so most of the things we do are common, whether we are Sri Lankans, Indians, or Vietnamese. But there are cultural differences, and it'll be a huge mistake on the Indian part or whoever, or if you're going to a new country, to assume that they are just like us, because you just miss out the nuances, the differences that are there, and that's such a powerful thing, and that's what empathy is about. Yes, I think as a promoter, as a manager, when you're launching something, you need to spend much more time on empathizing with what are you trying to solve. Like, for example, take the case of Domino's. Now, Domino's cracked the entire delivery market by saying we will deliver within 30 minutes, otherwise, the pizza is free, right? Now, that was a very powerful promise. They did not talk about the pizza quality. They just said we will give it to you free, and whether you're delivering Domino's whether you're ordering Domino's in New York or in Colombo or in Bombay, it's the same promise. Now that's a very brave promise, and they realize that when I'm ordering a pizza, I want it quickly. It's not a gourmet meal I'm trying to order. Like, I want something. I'm hungry. I just want the beers are getting over. The cricket match is going on, so I want the pizza quickly to sort of. And they cracked it, and they really cracked it, and they made it like such a brilliant promise now. So I think and that's why I sometimes I say, wow, these companies have actually done these things. You talked about Netflix, how Netflix changed the entire thing, because the way they and and we can blame them, because they the way they trigger the next episode, the next season, they just keep you hooked on to it, so there's no pause. But they've cracked it again, the way they've understood the customer psyche, good or bad, whatever it is, but they've really cracked, and basically making us lazier and lazier as human beings. just building on that. So I think that is where the value of empathy comes, and I can't really emphasize too much, because that is the core of any innovation. And there's a lovely technique I would really encourage the guys to, and maybe if I can share it on the screen. I don't know whether I can share it, but otherwise, if you guys can Google something called the empathy map canvas. So I think you just get you'll get a template there, and it's a very simple template. It basically talks about it has the customer in the center. Then it starts off by having these 7 questions. Who are you empathizing? Who are you trying to empathize with? So for example, if it's something you're doing in the insurance claim areas, so you're trying to empathize with the claims person. Then it asks the question, okay, what do they need? What does the insurance person who's claiming for motor insurance, what does she need? What do they need actually? So do they need quick settlement? Do they need clarity? What are they trying to do? So that's the second question that this empathy map tries to force you to think through. The third thing it says is that, what do they see? So you have a customer in this example, people who want to claim motor insurance. What are they seeing? So they are seeing a big form. They're seeing an office. They're going to an office. They're seeing a customer service which may not be good. So they are seeing all this. What are they saying? So they're saying that they don't understand the claim process. Then the fifth point is that what do they do? What are they doing? Are they waiting in line for long? Are they filling up forms? What are they actually doing? And then it says the sixth point is like what do they hear? So when they're sitting and trying to do the claim process, what are they hearing? What are the questions that they are talking about? What are people talking to them about? And then finally, you build a sort of a balance sheet of the pains and gains that the customer is going through the current process of whatever you want to change. So I think it's a very simple technique. Yes, I don't know whether you saw it on screen, but it's a fairly well published empathy map tool. But what it does, this technique, it forces the innovator or anyone who wants to develop a new go-to market. It really forces you to think through the customer's 6-7 key areas. So if you do it well, you have a better chance of not making the mistakes that say Starbucks made in Vietnam or somewhere else.
Sanjeev, I couldn't see it on the screen, but I think that's something I think the audience can Google and get hold of.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think, going through
Should I
a
try
small
to share it?
checklist.
Yes, sir. Should I try to share it quickly?
Yeah, if you could share your screen, Sanjeev.
Let me share the screen. Oh, okay. 1 second. This is a new thing for me also. This.
Same here.
Try again. Okay. Can you see this
Yeah,
empathy
Sanjeev,
map?
slowly. Yeah, can see.
So it's a very simple technique which I found useful, Yasith, and maybe our audience will find useful. So we talk about empathy, which is trying to understand what the customer is going through for the problem area that you are trying to solve. And what this template does, it forces you to ask these seven questions. First one is that who are we empathizing with? So like in the example that I was talking about, Yasith, is that an insurance claim is a big process, and if you talk about motor insurance, so that's a big process. So we did something in Fairfirst about a few years back, by which we adopted an AI model to settle claims quickly. And the main thing we did was, because customers were waiting for a few hours or few days for getting claims settled, and we tried to improve that entire process. So our customer was clearly the claimants. The second was like understanding what do they do currently, what do they see currently, what are they saying, are they happy with the process, not happy, what are they doing, today, what are they hearing, and then finally summarizing all this in the pluses and minuses of the process. So very, very simple tool, but I think it was quite an easy way for us to develop insights about the customer.
I think that's a great tool, Sanjeev. I think it forces you to answer some of these questions.
Yeah.
And I think it serves as a great checklist to eventually, before we go to market, to really know that what we are proposing is something that is going to be valid for that particular target segment. What I've
Absolutely.
also found quite useful to do, Sanjeev, at this point is, I mean, especially when we work with certain other clients, is to really put together a current customer journey. Like even the claims, let's say, scenario that you brought up. I mean, what I would do is I'll actually put the current customer journey, say customer coming to the office, making a claim of taking the phone up, if that's a particular journey that customer can start. There could be multiple starting points of a journey, but how do these journeys go from one point to the end? And honestly, there was one scenario that we were actually, interestingly enough, that was for an insurance client. What we would do is, once we put the journey down, we'll actually put happy and sad faces. At that point, the customer is happy. At that point, the customer is sad. And also, what we would do is, just to be convinced, because ourselves are the ones who are building the solution in that scenario. We were consulting for this client, and we were looking at ways of improving the process, and we were looking at what technologies can come in. So before all that, we really wanted to be convinced as to what is making us sad or what is making us happy in that process. So we did it ourselves, actually. Then what we did was, we got a few other consumers to go through the entire process and give us feedback. Again, I think, Sanjeev, even in filling a customer empathy map, one thing is, we of course need to think in the shoes of the customer, but also we need to talk to the customer and ask about their pain areas and their needs. And in that scenario, let's say for that client, we would actually talk to some customers and ask, okay, if you start from this point of, let's say, making a call, at different points, are you happy, are you sad, and why are you sad or why are you happy? Because that would really get us to conceptualize and develop solutions. So I think whatever we do, Sanjeev, I feel we need to talk to the consumer, maybe as a one-on-one discussion, focus group discussion. If you can launch a survey, well and good. I mean, right now we have enough tools, even if we enter a new market. I mean, just a digital form sometimes. We should do it in a way that I think is representative of the entire segment that we want to achieve. I think that's where I think a little bit of simple data analytics can come in. I mean, I'm sure we are talking to a more sophisticated data audience who are specialists in AI. But even when we want to find and get the pulse of the consumer, we need to ensure that we're talking to customers, not at our convenience, just because, let's say, we feel people who will answer a call, that's easy. We call a few customers. No, that might not be our consumer base. Our consumer base might be people who don't regularly use mobile phones, but then we'll have to go to the field, sit with, let's say, if you're developing, let's say, a claims solution for farmers for a crop insurance policy, we can't then sit in our comfortable office in Colombo, call a few farmers and answer their problem. We'll have to go to the farm, sit with them, see what their problems are, because then our sample is good. We are talking to actual farmers, and we see the real life scenario. We see whether they're using smartphones, whether they're using feature phones. Why don't they use smartphones? I mean, there was an instance where we were developing a digital product for a bank, and we were under the impression still some amount of farmers would be using mobile phones or rather smartphones, because they can afford it. We were looking at their income patterns, and it was okay. I mean, affording by buying a 15,000-20,000 cheap smartphone was within their capacity. But I met few. We had actually had a discussion with about 20 farmers in one group, and most of them claim that they don't use it. Why? Not because of affordability, because it's terribly inconvenient for them. Because they would, when they go to the farm, they'll drop the phone, or it'll get splashed with water, and they can only manage with a feature phone. So whatever solution we develop has to be then feature phone ready, not smartphone ready. So I think those are a few things I've picked up, Sanjeev. I think empathy is important, and when we talk to consumers, I think it can't be at our comfort level. We got to really hit the ground.
Absolutely spot on, man. Yes, it's absolutely spot on, and I think both of us agree that it's one of the biggest advice I think I can give to anyone who's getting into the startup phase, that if you need to spend really a good amount of time on understanding what the customer needs, because otherwise you'll end up doing what many startups are doing currently, which is like they end up pivoting their original business model because suddenly they've realized that the idea they had doesn't have a market. So start pivoting. And by the time it's over, they're like ballet dancers rather than startup entrepreneurs. So I think that's something. So with that, yes, we move on to the second stage of design thinking, which is defining the problem. So I think that empathy part, where you understand what the customer is going through, will help you crystallize that exact problem. What is the problem you're trying to solve, and what is the solution that you have? And again, one of the nice techniques that I have found useful is a technique called the lean canvas, and I'll just Google and share it on the screen. And again, I'm sure all these are like regularly available all over the world. So okay, let me just share it, and then we can talk a bit about this lean canvas. Okay, so I've just Googled one of the things that came up, and let's see a better version of it. Yeah. Okay. Yes, you can see this on the screen, right?
Yes, Sanjeev, we can see the screen.
So what this
If you
template
could
does,
just cross off the other bit, Sanjeev, probably is, yeah. Yes.
Let me just open it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Much better.
So again, I just opened it randomly, Yasith, so I'm sure the guys can find a better copy of it on the net. But what it does is that in the definition stage, it forces you again to have a very structured way of thinking. So when you're defining your solution, it starts off with saying what is the problem you're trying to solve. Then it starts off with the solution. What is the solution you have? Then it breaks down to the key metrics that have to work for your solution to work. These two combined, the problem, solution, and key metrics, will give you the unique value proposition that you're trying to develop. Sometimes you may have an unfair advantage. Typically, that can happen because there could be a licensing thing, stuff like that, or the market could be a proprietary market. So that is, it's good to document that. It's good to document the channels that you may have. Then you start talking about the customer segments. Then, of course, you quantify the cost structure of your solution and the revenue streams. So again, no rocket science in our thinking, but what this template does, it forces a certain way of thinking, which may help a startup person to go through their own problem definition or the solution definition, as it may be. So this is called the lean canvas map. Does that make sense, Yasith?
It does, Sanjeev. I think it's quite similar to a business model canvas. I think
it is same, very similar, very similar. Yes, yeah.
And yeah, business model canvases have been very useful for me as well. Even like when I really get my team to understand a new customer, and before we get into a product, any project, like then in my consulting days, I would get them to quickly draw up a business model canvas, and from their view, I tell them to understand the customer before we walk through the doors of the customer.
Yeah. So again, these are nice ways of just forcing a thinking pattern, which may help the startup, the people who want to do some new ideas. The third stage of design thinking really is that, okay, you've understood the problem of the customer, you empathize with the customer, you've defined your solution. Now you've got to start ideating it and really building flesh to it. And that ideating process, yes, it is again important, and you actually touched upon that, is that there's an importance of making sure that you have a diversified group of inputs. So when you're trying to create a solution or ideating a solution, you need to make sure that you have enough inputs which are across the board. So for example, if your sample is comprising only of men who live in Colombo 5, that may not give you a good solution going ahead, So I think that the importance of diversity really comes in saying that, if your solution is for men who are living in Colombo 5, then have the sample for that. But if you're trying to build a solution which is across the island, if you're trying to build a solution for the world, then your entire input sample has to be representative of that. And sometimes, again, we end up being lazy, or we just become shy, and we don't spend the effort to really get our inputs from a properly diversified audience. And that can be quite quite crippling when you go to the next stages of development.
Sanjeev, I was doing a session on data analytics this morning, and we were talking about biases actually when we do
Nice.
sampling.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think this cartoon actually, there was this interesting cartoon I picked up to explain some of the biases that we come across in sampling. And the cartoon, I wish I had the cartoon. Basically, it's where a person goes to a dog show and viewers whether they are
Sorry, Yasith, I've lost you.
I think Yasith is having a connectivity issue.
Okay. Yeah, I think the point on biases is so important, and that happens also as business leaders, as CEOs. We get so trapped in our own views, and we find it sometimes difficult to get views from the other. But it's so important to have an open mind and make sure that the input comes from everyone, because otherwise we end up being adopting a view which is really blinkered and may not be representative of the world that we are trying to uh, solve or serve.
Yeah. So let's wait for a few seconds, Sanjeev.
Sure,
Yasith
sure,
should be.
sure. Welcome back, Yasith.
Sorry, Sanjeev. I
No
think we were talking
problem.
about biases and
Yeah, you're
probably
talking about the bias, and you were giving an example of the cartoon. So
probably the network didn't
yeah,
like us talking about biases. Over to you, Sanjeev. I think we were talking about identifying our customer base and then really ensuring that
yeah. But I think
we
the point you make, Yasith,
put
again,
the
it
right
goes back to
people.
the first point, is that yeah, I think it's so important to have a good diversified people with whom you can ideate your ideas and thoughts instead of just being limited to. So one of the big biases that we have is a confirmation bias. So I think social media platforms know it really well. So they give me the feeds that I like to see rather than what I should see. So they know my political leanings, they know the cricket team I support, and the feed that comes to me is all supporting that view. And that is okay for social media, but may not be very good if you're trying to develop a new product or a new idea. So I think that's the importance of this entire ideation, which is the third step of design thinking. Yeah. So moving on to the fourth step, yes, the fourth step is really, so you've got a problem to solve. You have everything. You've ideated it. The fourth step is the prototyping, or the minimum, the MVP. The like the prototyping. Like before you go to market with the full product, can you create something which gives a feel of the product, which is a prototype, and that prototype can actually be just a paper drawing. It need not be a full thing, but can you actually get a feel of the product to a potential customer? And that is an important step before you start really you're putting all your money in building that new thing. And again, I think sometimes we miss out in our excitement of doing a new product. We miss out that entire prototyping stage, which can be quite crippling. One of the added elements of beyond prototyping is really the minimum viable product. And there are two differences in the minimum viable product. What is required is that the MVP will have at least the core benefits of that product embedded in that thing, and you can get a view of the revenue stream. So it's not so much about improving the technical glitches in the product, but just a feel that, can I get 100 rupees for it? Can I get 20 rupees for it? And that is what the MVP does. And again, I think that's really a nice step to have before one really goes into the full-fledged go-to-market market launch. Yeah.
Perfect, Sanjeev. And then from that point, Sanjeev, what would you do?
So after that, then it's really the test, the final stage of like, okay, so you have your MVP, you have the entire thing, and then you go to the market, then you choose your channels, you choose everything, and if you can, if it's a new product idea, and if you can show it to a potential investor that you've actually gone through these stages, I think your own ability to raise capital, at least for the go to market for funding that stage, is much more. You have a much better footing, because I think that's what any investor will be looking at. That have you done these basic steps? Not only do you have a great idea, but you've tested the idea with the customer, you've done a prototype, you've done all those things, and now you need the money to, advertise or put some new product in the market. So I think that's where it really starts building up. And the good thing, Yasith, and I think all of us know this, is that ultimately it's all about progress. No, your go-to market will never be a one-time exercise. It will be a progress. You'll keep improving it. So I think that's the realization that all of us should have, that it's okay not to have your 100% success on day one, but as long as you have this iterative loop of improving your own product, your own process, you'll keep improving it, and you'll keep refining your go-to-market strategy, and progress will slowly lead to perfection. So I think that's where we need to really focus on.
Fail fast, learn fast, Sanjeev.
Absolutely right. Fail fast. Fail very fast. Yes.
So Sanjeev, you spoke about investors at a particular point. I think prototyping really helps us to even communicate something to the investor. One, it shows that, okay, we've gone through some of the steps before: empathy, defining the problem statement, identifying the market, and then things like that. And we can show something, which we can touch and feel to an investor, and it shows them that we've thought through a few things. But let's say, okay, we get the funding, or let's say we bootstrap, but then let's say when we have a minimum viable product, and let's say, Sanjeev, we have few markets, right, that we could potentially go to. How do you really prioritize which one to try out first? Definitely, again, we need to fail fast, learn fast. But what would we pick first? Is it based on? I mean, there could be multiple parameters. I mean, based on the distribution channels we have.
I think Yasith, you've lost Yasith again.
Oh, Sanjeev, can you hear me now?
Can. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying, Sanjeev, when we have a good, at least a minimum viable product, and we are confident that we can go to market, and we could potentially have, let's say, multiple markets we can go to, or different customer segments that we can approach, even with the same product. Maybe it doesn't even have to be a variation of product. How do we prioritize? Let's say we go to this market, or we target this segment. I mean, there are multiple factors could come into play, like the distribution channels we have, our presence in that market, or our budgets to really push out promote our product. I mean, would you typically go through a standard checklist to identify and prioritize, or it's very subjective based on the product or service that we want to sell and the market?
So I think it sort of goes back to the first stage of empathy. I think, Yasith, I think there is a primary market for any new product. Like there is a primary market that is there for any new product. So, for example, one of the companies I'm working with, one of the startup companies that I'm working with, is called Camcom.ai. Now, what they do is really they're using computer vision and AI for finding defects at a material at a external level. So they're finding defects at an external level. Now, that's a very generic solution they're trying to solve. So, like, for example, if I have a table, that will scan it and it'll show, okay, there are cracks here and stuff like that, and it'll codify it, saying that this crack was slightly old, this crack is deeper. So all the good stuff it does. Now, for them, the market is and it can be anywhere. Like, so they can go to the airline industry, they can go to the furniture shop. I have when I got associated with them, I
That's a
found
good and bad place to be at, Sanjeev.
it is a good and
When you
bad
say
place.
when you say my market is everyone.
Yeah, but again, the important thing, Yasith, becomes that now they've had the wisdom, the promoters have had the wisdom to associate themselves with different people from different industry. So they are techies. So they've understood their tech and how to do it. Now they have me. I'm saying, wow, I can use this in my motor claims. You know, so I will take it to my motor claims team. They have someone else who's saying, okay, I'll take it to the auto guys. So I think that's how it approaches. I think it's so important for a startup guy or for someone with brilliance in technology to be able to talk about the technology with 10 people, and those 10 people will find the relevant market for you. It'll be very difficult for the technologist to say, okay, this is my market, I'll be there only. It's very difficult. So I think that's where the effort has to come, a bit of a collaborative effort. And then you use that, because I think some of the things that the technologists may see, uh, mm, they may be limited in their own experience, while the business guys can see it in a much broader way. And the good thing, the business guys are struggling, they anyway don't see it. So I think that's where it comes in. So I think so my advice would be that you may think you have a natural market, you may think about it, but if it's a technology play, there's a good chance. I'll give you an example. Yes, that we in Fair First again, they use cameras and remote visioning for claim settlement. Now during COVID, the same technology was being used for internal audit, the same camera visioning. So suddenly the technology was the same, but the use case became different, because COVID did not allow the auditors to roam around. And I think that is where the markets evolve. I think that's the point, I guess, yes, that I'm trying to make, because sometimes solutions can be quite generic, for especially on technology part.
I think that's a brilliant point, Sanjeev, that you raised, because I think we can't also sometimes have very hard and fast rules as to say this is going to be my market, especially for like the couple of examples you brought up on image recognition and then detecting defects. I think collaboration is a keyword that you brought up. If I'm running, especially I think in a B2B environment, if I do have some good collaborators, in your scenario, I think you were possibly a collaborating partner as an insurance provider working with this entity, and you saw a use case, and that domain knowledge probably would have helped one for them to contextualize this for insurance, at least for you as a client. And if that is working, which means then all other insurance clients will become potential market for them, and then they've learned a lot.
Absolutely right.
And they've learned the applications to the industry through that.
Absolutely.
I think that's something.
So I think that's
I've also noticed. Sorry, Sanjeev.
No, carry
No, I
on.
was just saying that I think, I think for Sri Lanka context as well, I think that's something I thought we should leave with the students as well. I think we sometimes develop some great things in a very laboratory environment, either in our schools or universities. We have incubators, we have actual labs. But I think faster we also go out and look for corporates which can collaborate with us. I think that's where really the use case comes to life, and then you will really see, okay, this is applicable for this industry, and now I've developed a great prototype with this particular client, which now I can scale up to the industry, and I've learned a lot during that process, and I know the industry applications end to end. That's something I think if our brilliant tech minds can do that, I think they're going to do way more impactful work and work that can really benefit the society, as well as help them to commercialize and give some good value for the intellectual capacity that they have.
Absolutely agreed. And it'll be great. I think they'll be doing a service to the old school business managers like us if they come and talk to us also, because I think we learn a lot from them, and we can improve our own processes. So I think they should have that confidence that what they have, the technologists have, what the young kids have, the bright minds have, the business guys don't have. And it's actually a win-win if both of them can work together. So
Exactly, Sanjeev. Exactly. I think definitely great to have you. Even I think being part of the tech community, and then I think you interacted with a few tech companies in Sri Lanka as well. So I think that's what we also would love to see, even from other industry experts, to come on board and I think work with some of our universities. And I think it's a two-way streak. I think it's up to the university kids to really expand their network and to start working with the industry. So Sanjeev, I think we've had a great dialogue. I myself enjoyed it, and hopefully some of the participants would have too. We've come towards the end of it, Sanjeev. Any, last remarks that you'd like to leave with the audience before we give it a wrap?
I think I'll just say that there's some amazing stuff happening. Yasith, we all know this. There's some magical stuff is happening in the technology space. It'll be great if that entire magic can be taken to the business space, because ultimately that's where the real problems are, business or community or wherever it is. And if we can somehow together solve it, I think that'll be. I think that the days and eras where technology and real issues were separate have to disappear. I think universities and real life have to come together and really start holding hands and moving forward. I think that's where real magic will happen then.
Exactly, Sanjeev. I think time to definitely to put destroy the walls and build a nice connect between the industry and academia. And I think that's a great initiative taken by STEM Up and SLASSCOM, UNDP, and some of the other partners as well, to really get students to ideate and come up with AI-driven solutions to solve some of the sustainability development goals. So I enjoyed being part of the session. Sanjeev, hope you did too, and thanks for joining the session. I think from both of us, Sanjeev, I think let's say good evening to everyone else, and I'll pass the mic on to Prabhat. Over to you, Prabhat.
Thank you very much, Yasith and Sanjeev. Really appreciate your support and great valuable knowledge sharing with our university students. I'm pretty sure this session was intended for university students, but I'm sure it is really beneficial for school students as well, because one day they will come to the level where they have to look at the points you discuss and think about it, and look at the market from a different angle to come up with a better idea and better product. So I will just take 1 minute to take our audience through the way of submitting the submission, because we just open up the hackathon for submissions. Earlier we open up for registrations. We got around 400 registrations from all around the country. It's not a small number, but also that is just a beginning. Now we want our registered teams to submit their entries, so they have 21 days time period, starting from last week till 21st of December, so they can log in to the portal. So what they have to do, they have to go to hackai.lk, and from the login page, they have to enter the credentials they use when they were signing up. And then I'm gonna use my dummy account. So on the portal, so you have this center card, hackathon submission. You have to just click on start submission, and then you will be redirected to the submission form. So you have to select your category, the sustainable development goal you're gonna focus on, and then click next. Likewise, there's a questionnaire. Eventually you can submit your entry. So initial submission would be using to select the finalist, and then those finalists will have to present or pitch their idea in front of a panel of judges. So you have, it's still more than I think 14 days to submit to entry. If we are getting more requests, we'll be slightly extending the timeline as well. But try your best to submit your entry on time. So there are two questions on coming from social media. Is that okay if I take them, or you can see it on your right side?
Of course.
Okay, the first question is the summary of the question, the benefit of using social media when trying to come up with a go-to-market strategy, whether is it a good idea to gather information from social media, through social media insights, or we really need to engage with people like in person? Would that work? So that's a summary of the question, like usages of social media for go-to-market strategy.
I'll give a quick answer, Prabhat, and then I'll pass it on to Sanjeev. I think again, as a data analytics person, I feel if it gives a good representation of my market, I'd be okay with that. But even then, if it's a good representation of the market, however, if I still need to sit and have a dialogue, because sometimes with social media, what we might get is just a few answers or some insights, but the potential consumer may not really be able to elaborate on certain things. So then in that scenario, I'd still take a physical approach, even though if it's a representative sample. But if it's not, definitely I'll have to look at other consumers as well. Sanjeev?
Yeah, no, same thing. I think, and again, I'm talking about our cultural context, Yasith, whether it's India or whether it's in Sri Lanka. English is not our natural language, and most of the social media we have is English based. At least the LinkedIn's and stuff like that. And I think while it feels that you have access to many people on social media, but you may not have access to the relevant people, and definitely you won't have that engagement, Yasith, that you talk about. I think you gave the example when you spoke to the farmers, you got that insight of the phone. Now that was such a brilliant insight that wouldn't have happened on social media, just wouldn't have happened. So I think maybe you can use social media for a very dipstick sort of a factual thing, like but I think if you really want to move to a prototyping stage, I think it makes sense to talk to people. I think it really makes sense. I think one has to be brave and just do that. And it doesn't have to be many people. It can just be a sample which is diversified and relevant enough.
Right, thank you, Yasith and Sanjeev. So there's one more question: how we can set up KPIs for an early stage startup?
So I'll go first, and then maybe Yasith, you can add on. So KPIs is really it's not so much about what stage of startup you're in. It's really about what are you trying to manage, what are you trying to develop. So for example, if it's about losing weight, and you basically, your KPI becomes your weighing machine in the morning and evening. And one of the KPIs become, okay, weight is linked to how much intake I take. So the other KPI becomes, okay, what is my plate size? So I think it's really important that KPI is linked to that. Doesn't really make a difference whether it's a early stage or a mature business, but it has to be, what do you want to measure? And ultimately, one of the big things that all of us know as human beings is that what you measure gets managed, and really that is a reality. And you will have to crack your own head. Like for example, if I give the example of the claim process that I spoke about in Fair First, there we were very clear that we want to measure two things. We want to measure the NPS, which is the Net Promoter Score of the customer, of the claimant, and we want to measure the time of claims, because sometimes I can squeeze the time, but my service may actually become worse. So I wanted to measure both, and I think that's where it becomes. There's no a KPI. It will really depend on what you're trying to solve, and that becomes your KPI. Is it?
And Sanjeev, I think also to add on to what you said, I think my views on KPIs is, I think I have two things I've generally found. Sometimes, sometimes I would say not practiced too well, at least in large corporates. Number one, all KPIs have to be interlinked. We do come up with certain KPIs. Consultants come and provide. I've been a culprit, or at least represented a community of culprits. But they have to be very much interlinked. Sometimes, when we analyze the supply chain, we try to increase one, let's say, fulfillment of deliveries, and then at the same time we affect just to improve a KPI for a particular brand in coming from one factory. Just to get that KPI up, we actually completely mess up our entire business operation and affect another KPI for another brand that I produce for. So they have to be interlinked. And the other thing is, yes, I think at the end of everything, we need to ensure that whatever we do will show impact to all of our stakeholders, our employees, our customers, our shareholders, and society at large. I mean, especially in the case of solving problems on sustainability development goals. But yes, those are the final ways of monitoring our impact. But just some of the operational KPIs, I feel they don't have to be sometimes very standard KPIs that we take from the industry. Because if you're developing innovative solutions, you might have to go much deeper. I mean, I'll just take a very classic example how the whole cricketing world has evolved. Back then, we would analyze and then say, like you say, look at the strike rate of a batsman, and we would look at maybe average of a batsman. But in the new T20 era, we have smart stats. We now look at, we contextualize it. We look at what point a particular batsman is batting, and then what bowler that person is facing, and then we give a score, and then say, okay, that person has actually done better in that context, and that number comes out. Because that's the power of data. I think with data and analytics, we can actually contextualize and come up with better KPIs. And if you can do that, by all means do it, because at least you yourself will criticize your business better. And we are better at a point where those metrics have impacted your eventual bottom line. So those are my couple of points I've noticed, especially in corporates, and I think for startups, your can be different.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I think we have ran out of time too, and thank you so much, Yasith and Sanjeev, again for joining with us. For the attendees, if you haven't registered for Hacked AI, please go to hackedai.lk and register your team and submit your solution. Looking forward to have great solutions from all parts of the country. You can be a school students or university student, doesn't matter. We have 2 rounds separately for all of you. Submit your entry and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
All the best,
guys.
Everyone. Thank you.
All the best. Yeah. Take care, man. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.